So Alan, where in the world are you talking to me from right now?
Oh, I'm in Arlington, Virginia, which is right outside of Washington, D.C.
I was looking at the session that you have for all of us
Hmm.
for the conference, and it sounds so interesting. It's about agile adaptive approach to organizational change. So
Correct.
tell me about that.
I don't want to spoil too much of the
No.
presentation. Throughout my career, I've been involved in a lot of organizational changes, between, automating processes, changing processes, reorganizations, mergers, organizational crises. I've lived through it all. And a couple of years ago, I write monthly blogs about project management, leadership, agile. And a couple of years ago, I started thinking about, well, organizational changes just usually don't go that well. And I was thinking, we usually think about an organizational change sort of like we do a traditional project, big upfront planning, and we have our milestones, we have to mark everything. And it wasn't working. And I was thinking, well, what if we took an agile approach? And then all of a sudden, the idea of sort of using an analogy of the business trip being our traditional projects versus a road trip as our agile projects, and thinking about our organizational change more as a road trip than a business trip. And so I actually ended up writing two articles about it. And have presented this topic a couple of times, and it's just a lot of fun because rather than being boring stuff about organizational change theory, I'm you just have lots of fun, and I've got like pictures from different trips I've gone on, different restaurants I like to go to, and I've got 14 different ideas about how we should be thinking about organizational change.
Sounds so great. Sounds really fun, actually, and very different. Because you're right. I think metaphors and using different kinds of like life stories that kind of take it outside of the theory makes it that much more interesting. So, organizational change. Have you worked in organizational change all your life? Like, why change?
Well, I haven't worked in organizational change. I've been more impacted by organizational change. Not too long ago, before I started becoming an instructor and coach and consultant, I worked for a major financial services company. And in my last 2 years, I literally went through 6 organizational changes. And I was a director. I was a director of a large project management team. I had 170 people working for me. And it was exhausting. And even though I recognized, some of the best practices that we should be doing and recognize some of the impacts of all this change, it was just still really tough. And that really made me think about, well, how can we do these things better?
Mhm. Yeah. And when you say that you went through six organizational changes in what, 1 year?
2 years, yeah.
2 years. That is a lot of change. And what do you think? Do you think right now, due to whatever's happening around in the world, all of this has kind of accelerated change in most companies?
Oh, definitely. I think that COVID has has brought out some really interesting things and also some really difficult things for people to deal with. I mean, think about it. Was it 6, 8 months ago? People were lucky. It's like, oh, I get to work from home 1 day a week or 2 days a week. And I don't know how it is up there in Canada, but down here, most people have been out of the office since March.
Yeah, same here.
And it's for the first couple of weeks, it was like there was a lot of change. It's like, okay, how do we now work remotely? How do we do everything either on Zoom or Teams or whatever platform? And I think the new challenge there with organizational change is, and this is something that I've been thinking about in terms of a, a future article, is that I think as the crisis has gone on, there's been like bit by bit by bit, just a little bit of a loss of productivity and creativity and collaboration. And I think we're sort of beginning to get to that tipping point, or some people have already gotten to that tipping point where it's like, I really miss being in the office. I miss working with my peers. I am exhausted from being on Zoom calls, from 8 or 9 in the morning till 6 or 7 at night. It's really funny. My daughter just started her career and is working at ironically enough, the same company I used to work at. And she's thinking of just going into the office, even though there's like nobody there, because she's tired of working from her apartment. And she just needs a change in scenery. So I think it will be interesting to see how it all plays out. I mean, I think it's been an amazing 8 months or 9 months, and we'll probably have another 9 months to a year before things are back to normal.
Exactly. I think Zoom fatigue is real. Like what they
Oh
call
yeah.
Zoom fatigue, it is completely real. And we've kind of all been, I think a whole society as a whole has been thrown into this massive change project, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's basically which companies are adapting faster than others, are handling it better than others. Because you're right. I know people too who also want to just go to the office because they're tired of staying home and not having any face-to-face interaction.
Yeah. It's really interesting. I was listening to a podcast a couple of weeks ago, and they were talking about remote work.
Yeah.
And one of the folks was talking about back in the 90s, he was a graphic artist, graphic designer,
Mhm.
and he worked remote. And, there'd be conference calls and things like that. And I was reflecting back in the 90s, I was working in telecom, and I was working on a lot of the early internet um, projects and programs. And I was working with teams from around the country, in the States. And, it wasn't as exhausting as being on, or as it is today. And it's interesting because, we had conference calls, we had email, but we didn't have full bandwidth. We might meet once or twice a week as a team. And I think in some ways the technology is awesome. And I'm not saying that the technology isn't great, but I think it's also, we need to think about how do we use the technology more wisely, which may also be using it less so that we've got time to work and time to concentrate and time to just think. I don't know if we have that, we're leaving ourselves that time anymore.
That's so true. That's true. And it can eventually lead to burnout and all of that stuff too, right? Because the lines between work and home are blurring, and we'll see how that goes, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, but that was so great to kind of chat with you and see how you came to be not enthusiastic, but um, how you came to develop an agile, adaptive approach or mindset to change.
Well, I mean, probably we should have talked about this earlier. I've been actually doing Agile. I mean, I've had experience running Agile projects all the way back to the early 90s. So I was doing Agile well before Agile was even invented. And then when I was in telecom, we had a very Agile work environment. And so over the last couple of years, I led an Agile transformation at the financial services company, and I'm now schooled in, advanced certifications in Scrum. I'm one of the first people that is a disciplined Agile instructor, and I saw that Mark Lyons is going to be the keynote speaker. Sent Mark a note, it's like, it could be great to see it. I wish we were there together. And I also teach scaled Agile. So I have all these different perspectives on how do we bring agility into the workplace. And so I think it's a fun way of thinking. I actually do a lot of work with like nonprofits and teach them how to apply Agile principles to managing their business. And it's been successful in that realm as well.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. And we can't wait to hear the rest of your actual talk. And I'm going to make sure that I don't miss it. But before we actually, meet you and listen to your talk on December 1st, if someone else wants to kind of find out more about you, where can they find you on the internet, Alan?
So easiest place to find me is I'm on LinkedIn, Alan I Zucker
Okay.
on LinkedIn. I also have my own website, Project Management Essentials, pmessentials.us, and I'm changing the URL, so it's also pmessentials.co. And I've written over 70 different articles on project management, Agile, and leadership. And if you're that interested, you can actually read the 2 articles that I wrote on road trip in the organizational change. And so that, that can give you a preview, but it's a good articles, and it's really a fun presentation as well.
I think I'm going to have to check out those articles for sure. Absolutely. It sounds really, really interesting. Well, thank you so much, Alan, for joining me today and
Oh,
kind of
it's my
having a
pleasure.
chat with me. Yeah,
Oh, it's great. I can't wait. I wish I was able to come up in person, but maybe next year.
maybe next year if all goes well. Fingers crossed.
Yes.